Hey guys, if you're watching this, it means I've either had my baby or it means that I am currently in the process of waiting for baby and I just can't be at school right now. Um, Today we are starting Seedfolks, and before we get too far into it, you're going to need to have three things out. You're going to need your book, you're going to need a sheet of paper, and you're going to need something to write with. So you can do a little bit of this. Um, but this is the first time I've ever done a video lesson. I'm not sure how this is going to go, but ordinarily this is one of my favorite things to teach during the year. And I'm a little sad that I'm missing this lesson, but I guess I'd rather be where I'm at. But the reason we are reading Seedfolks, is partially, I don't know, two things. One reason that we are reading Seedfolks is for STAR prep. You have your STAR test coming up, I believe, May 12th. And so we're going to spend a couple of weeks on Seedfolks to help you prepare for that test. Like I've said in class before, most of you don't even think twice about taking the STAR test. You're like, I'm fine, I got that. However, you really haven't had much, if any, practice on that sort of thing in the past year since you've been in our program, and so we need to spend a little bit of time going over that sort of thing. And later in the week, you're going to be answering questions based on Seedfolks that are star-styled questions, and you'll see pretty quickly how you kind of have to shift gears in the way that you answer those. So if you do not have them out already, remember 1, 2, 3. But if you don't have those out already, get those out now. If you need to pause, go ahead, and so on. But Seedfolks. Um, Seedfolks is about a group of people that live in apartments and grow a garden together. And I will say, the first time I came across Seedfolks, it was required reading from me. It's something that this program has read for a long time, so I read it before I taught it for the first time. And whenever I heard that it was about a group of people that grew a garden in the middle of like an apartment complex, I was a little skeptical of how good this little book could be, because none of what I've just said appeals to me at all. For most of you, none of what I've said so far probably will appeal to any of you either. But I will say this little book is lovely. I love this little book. And one thing you'll notice if you flip through it, like chapter by chapter, at the beginning of each chapter, you're going to see someone's picture and their name. Essentially, the way this book is structured is each chapter has a different narrator. And I believe there are 13 chapters in this book, meaning there are 13 different protagonists, and there's 13 different narrators, and none of the narrators overlap as far as like interacting, or not interacting, but I don't know, scratch that. But while I'm reading this, today I'm going to read the first 4 chapters. I'm going to stop at various points to kind of point out different things that will kind of help you train your eye as you're answering the questions, and also kind of help you to enjoy the book a little bit more, and kind of see the depth to it. But as I'm reading this and as I'm doing those questions, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to give a moment for you. You can pause it if you need a little bit more time, but I'm going to give you a moment for you to answer those questions. Because ordinarily, those are the points where we'd stop and have a discussion. Discussion about it, and I'd ask follow-up questions about it. But I'm not there. This is a video lesson. So I'm kind of working. It's a work in progress. But if you will answer Answer those questions on your sheet of paper, and actually do it. Don't be lame. Actually do it. Um, you'll be much better off. And then I'll go over kind of what maybe it might align with kind of what you're saying already, but hopefully you're going to see it. So anyway, this is Seedfolks, and so we start on page 1 with Kim. um, so before I start reading, flip through, and look at each chapter's beginning and look at the different pictures and just think about like what do you notice about each of the pictures. You may not notice anything yet, but the pictures the pictures have a lot to do with what this book is about, or about one of its major themes. So anyway, that's not something you need to write down, but I'm going to start reading. I stood before our family altar. It was dawn. No one else in the apartment was awake. I stared at my father's photograph, his thin face stern, lips latched tight, his eyes peering permanently to the right. I was 9 years old and still hoped that perhaps his eyes might move, might notice me. The candles and the incense sticks, lit the day before to mark his death anniversary, so Dad is dead, had burned out. The rice and meat offered him were gone. After the evening feast, past midnight, I'd been wakened by my mother's crying. My oldest sister had joined in. My own tears had then come as well, but for a different reason. I turned from the altar, tiptoed to the kitchen, and quietly drew a spoon from the drawer. I filled my lunch thermos with water and reached into the jar of dried lima beans. Then I walked outside to the street. The sidewalk was completely empty. It was Sunday, early in April. An icy wind teetered trash cans and turned my cheeks to marble. In Vietnam, we had no weather like that. Here in Cleveland, people called it spring. I walked half a block, then crossed the street and reached the vacant lot. I stood tall and scouted. No one was sleeping on the old couch in the middle. I'd never entered the lot before or wanted to. I did so now, picking my way through tires and trash bags. I nearly stepped on 2 rats gnawing and froze. Then I told myself I must show my bravery. I continued farther and chose a spot far from the sidewalk and hidden from view by a rusty refrigerator. I had to keep my projects safe. I took out my spoon and began to dig. The snow had melted, but the ground was hard. After much work, I finished one hole, then a second, then a third. I thought about how my mother and sisters remembered my father, and how they knew his face from every angle and held in their fingers the feel of his hands. I had no such memories to cry over. I'd been born 8 months after he died. So first question, how long has Dad been dead? Go ahead and pause if you need to. So if she was born 8 months after he died, he well, how old is she? I am so stupid. So on the first page, you'll notice it says she's 9 years old. She's 9 years old. So if he was born 8 months before, if she was born 8 months after he died, he's been dead close to 10 years. Or in this case, this is a death anniversary, and so this is his 10th death anniversary. Anyway, I'll continue. Worse, he had no memories of me. When his spirit hovered over our altar, did it even know who I was? I dug 6 holes. All his life in Vietnam, my father had been a farmer. Here, our apartment house had no yard. But in that vacant lot, he would see me. He would watch my beans break ground and spread, and he would notice with the pleasure their pods growing plump. He would see my patience and my hard work. I would show him that I could raise plants as he had. I would show him that I was his daughter. My class had sprouted lima beans in the paper cups the year before. I now placed a bean in each of the holes. I covered them up, pressing the soil down firmly with my fingertips. I opened my thermos and watered them all, and I vowed to myself that those beans would thrive. So, question 2. This one's significantly deeper, a little bit more difficult. Question is, why is she planting the garden? Go ahead and pause. I'll wait a second so that you can do that. So, in this case, this is this phrase on the back. This phrase on the back, common ground. That's something we're going to come back to quite a bit throughout this book. You'll see several different examples of it in the chapters that we're about to do. But in this case, um, she is planting the garden because her father was once a farmer. If you saw on the page before, on page 3, it says, I thought about how my mothers and sisters remembered my father, how they knew his face from every angle and held in their finger the feel of his hands. And then it said, worse, he had no memories of me. And so in this case, Kim, our narrator in this chapter, she is planting the garden as a way of having memories with her father. It's somewhat of a spiritual thing. If you notice, like they're lighting they're lighting candlesticks to mark his death anniversary, and so that may suggest there's a little bit of a religious element to it. And in this case, I think there's a little bit of that as well, where she feels like if she's, even though her dad's not there, since he was a farmer and she's kind of continuing his legacy in a way by planting these lima beans, she's able to create memories with him through that experience. And so, I don't know, I think it's kind of sweet. But with that in mind, if you notice, I just read chapter 1. Notice how short it is. Each night, you're going to have questions. The first set of questions is on chapters 1 through 4. It's a little bit longer than the other set of questions. However, every night after that, you're going to have questions over a set of 2 chapters. One of the beauties of Seedfolks for a lot of you will be the fact that each chapter is very short. And so, I don't know, keep that in mind. I don't know, we'll continue. So now we have Anna. Anna's chapter has a little bit different tone than Kim's. But I love Anna's chapter. She's a sweet old lady. So anyway, I do love to look out the window. Why do I need TV when I have 48 apartment windows to watch across the vacant lot and a sliver of Lake Erie? I've seen history out this window. So much. I was 4 when we moved here in 1919. The fruit sellers' carts and coal wagons were pulled down the street by horses back then. I used to stand back here and watch the coal brought up by the handsome lad from Groza. Groza is a little village in the Ukraine, or in Ukraine. Yeah, the village my parents were born in. Gibb Street was mainly Romanians back then. It was adio, goodbye, and all the shops when you left. Then the Romanians started leaving. They weren't the first or the last. This has always been a working class neighborhood. It's like a cheap hotel. You can stay until you've got enough money to leave. A lot of Slovaks and Indians moved in next. The Negro families in the Depression. Gibb Street became the line between the blacks and the whites, like a border between countries. I watched it happen through this very window. Now, this isn't something that you need to answer. However, this paragraph kind of draws the line in the sand as far as really hammering where this book is headed. Again, if you notice the pictures at the beginning of each chapter, the author is intentionally including those to kind of highlight the differences in races throughout this book. And so the first girl, she was an immigrant from Vietnam. This chapter is about an older lady who is an immigrant from Groza, or which is a town in Ukraine. And so a lot of these chapters, this is about as racially charged as it gets, but a lot of these chapters, most of these chapters, are very heavy in the racial or cultural aspect of each of the characters that are talking. So anyway, I'll continue. We're at the bottom of 6. I lived over the Cleveland Heights for 18 years. Then I moved back in to take care of my parents. That border moved too. Most all the whites left. Then the steel mills and the factories closed, and everybody left like rats. Underline that. Rats. Buildings abandoned. Men with no work drinking from 9 to 5 instead, down there in the lot. Always the sirens, people killing each other. Now I see families from Mexico and Cambodia in countries I don't know. 12 people sometimes in one apartment. New languages in the shops and on the street. These new people leave when they can, like the others. I'm the only one staying. It's so. Staying and staring out the same window. This spring I looked out and I saw something strange. Down in the lot, a little black-haired girl hiding behind that refrigerator. Another feature of Seedfolks right here. And I guess you can answer this on your thing. Question 3. Who is the little black-haired girl? That's about as much time as you need for that one. If you'll notice, although this story has different narrators, for each chapter, everyone ends up running into each other. And so the little black-haired girl is Kim from the first chapter. Now, with that in mind, and with the attitude she has towards other races in the paragraphs before, what do you think? Question 4. What do you predict is about to happen with Anna or Kim, or what's the attitude that she's going to have towards seeing Kim in the vacant lot? You can pause, give you a second. So here we go. Bottom of 7. She was working at the dirt and looking around suspiciously all the time. Then I realized she was burying something. I never had children of my own, but I've seen enough in that lot to know she was mixed up in something she shouldn't be. And after 20 years typing for the parole department, I just about knew what she'd buried. Drugs, most likely, or money, or a gun. The next moment, she disappeared like a rabbit. If you'll notice, I mentioned underline rats. Underline rats, and I guess you can underline rabbit as well. One thing that is very, very common across I guess cultural or racial insensitivity, I guess, is that often in a way of making those other races or cultures feel lesser, people will label or call the people of other races things that are not human, in a way to make them seem less human and so that you're less sympathetic to them. And so this is actually something that's been done throughout history. in the Rwandan genocide, one of the ways that like they convinced people to, I don't know, to go after the other class of people or culture of people is by calling them cockroaches. And so because like they called them cockroaches, um, the people who were the people in charge called them cockroaches. The people who were following them saw the other people as less than human and just committed all kinds of atrocities as a result. Anyway, um, just something to know. I thought of calling up the police. We're in the middle of 8. Then I saw her there the next morning, and I decided I'd call that my this I'd solve this case myself. We had a long spell of rain then. I didn't set eyes on her once. Then the weather turned warm, and I saw her twice more, always in the morning on her way to school. She was crouched down with her back to me, so I couldn't see what she was doing. My curiosity was like a fever inside me. Then one morning she was there, glancing about, and she looked straight up at this window. I'd pulled my head back behind the curtain. I wasn't sure if she'd seen me. If she had, she wouldn't leave her treasure buried long. Then I knew I'd have to dig it up before she did. I waited an hour after she left. Then I took an old butter knife and my cane and hobbled down 3 flights of stairs. I worked my way through that awful jungle of junk and finally came to her spot. I stooped down. It was wet there and easy digging. I hacked and dug, but didn't find anything except for a large white bean. I tried a new spot and found another, and a third. Then the truth of it slapped me full in the face. I said to myself, "What have you done?" 2 beans had roots. I knew I'd done them harm. I felt like I'd read through her secret diary and ripped out a page without meaning to. Without meaning to. I laid those beans right in the ground as gently as sleeping babies. Then I patted the soil as smooth as can be. So, question 4? I don't know where we're at. Question 4. Question 4. Is Anna a good person? Is Anna a good person? This is mainly opinion, but um, is Anna a good person? So you can pause, give you a second. Also answer why you feel that way. Don't just answer yes or no. That's boring. Believe in whatever point you make. So, is Anna a good person? So, I'm not going to tell you whether she's a good person, but I will keep this in mind. Um, Anna Anna is an old racist lady. But at the bottom of 9, at the bottom of 9, at the bottom of 9, she has the realization. She says, "What have you done? What have you done?" Um, and so it's a tough question. It's a tough question because on the one hand, you're like, this lady's very racist, but then you consider like where she came from. Um, she the circumstances of her life, the time period in which she was born into, have led her to kind of have that attitude, right or wrong. Um, however, however, whenever she digs up the seeds, and this is something that good people generally do, and good like a good person is kind of like relative. It's like, what do you define as a good person? But Anna is able to recognize her mistake, and she's willing to, despite her misconceptions and her preconceived notions of other races that she has, she's able to realize what she's done wrong and try to do something about it. Um, and so, anyway, You make your judgment. Anyway, I'm on page 10. The next morning she was back. I peeked around the curtain. She didn't look up here or give any sign that she noticed something wrong. I could see her clearly this time. She reached a hand into her school bag. Then she pulled out a jar, unscrewed the lid, and poured out water onto the ground. That afternoon, I bought some binoculars. Last question for this chapter. Last question. Based on that last sentence, that afternoon I bought some binoculars. What emotional response does the author want you to have here? And a follow-up question, like what emotional response? Does he want you to be sad about that? Does he want you to laugh about it? Does he want you to be indifferent to it? But what emotional response does the author want you to have based on that sentence, to that sentence? And then a follow-up question. What does this say about how the author wants the reader to perceive Anna? I guess another follow-up question is, what does this say about the tone of the book? So, for the first thing in order to answer that question of what emotional response does the author want you to have, you have to consider that afternoon I bought some binoculars. You have to think, why is she buying binoculars? So one, she's buying binoculars because she's old. Number two, yeah, there's my hand. Number two, she is buying the binoculars because it'll make her nosiness that much easier. But number three, she's buying the binoculars because she doesn't want to make a mistake like that again. She's like, I'm still going to be nosy. I'm still going to make my judgments from afar, but maybe with binoculars I won't make that mistake. And so the author with that sentence is wanting you to laugh. It's meant to be kind of a way of lightening the mood. At this point in the book looks like it could be headed into dark territory. But for the most part, this book is pretty lighthearted. And so the author includes a sentence like that. The author includes the sentence like that in order for maybe you to maybe not take Anna so seriously. And also to kind of lighten the mood of the book, to kind of get it within the tone that he wants it to be. He doesn't want this to be a very intense book. It's about people growing a garden. And so he wants it to be lighthearted, even though it's dealing with some darker themes. So anyway, on to Wendell. Wendell's picture. Wendell's also on the front of the book. Wendell is white, which is relevant to this chapter. So, my phone doesn't ring much, which suits me fine. That's how I got the news about our boy, shot dead like a dog in the street, and the word last year about my wife's car wreck. I can't hear a phone and not jerk inside. When Anna called, look, another crossing of the paths. When Anna called, I was still asleep. Phone calls that wake me up are the worst. Get up here quick, she says. I live on the ground floor and watch out for her a little. We're the only white people left in this building. I ran up the stairs. I could tell it was serious. I prayed I wouldn't find her dead. When I got there, she looked perfectly fine. She dragged me over to the window. Look down there, she says. They're dying. What? I yelled back. The plants, she says. I was mad. She gave me some binoculars and told me all about the Chinese girl. So, two questions on just that last sentence. She gave me some binoculars and told me all about the Chinese girl. So, first question. How soon after the last chapter is this occurring? How soon after the last chapter is this occurring? And then follow-up question of that, how do you know that? How do you know how long this is afterwards? You can pause, you can answer that. So first of all, She gave me the binoculars, meaning she's gone and actually bought the binoculars that you have. So the phone call does not happen immediately after the events of the last chapter. Um, happens very soon afterwards, but not. It's not like she does this, she sees it, and she immediately calls Wendell. She had to go out. She bought the binoculars, and so sometime after she actually did the act of going out and buying the binoculars. But then the second question to this, or I guess the third question, but told me all about the Chinese girl. What is what's going on here? Why did the author phrase Wendell what he said this way? Take a pause. Okay. So, in order to understand this line, you have to remember who he's referring to. He is referring to Kim. Yeah. He's referring to Kim. Kim is not Chinese. Kim's family is from Vietnam. Um, she is Vietnamese. Um, and so what's going on here is the author is showing how often white people, um, racist white people specifically, um, will say that everyone that is from Asian descent is Chinese, which is wrong. It's not right, but that's what's going on here. Anyway, continuing, page 12. I found the plants and got them in focus. There were 4 of them in a row, still little. They were wilted, leaves flopped flat on the ground. What are they? She asked. Some kind of beans. I grew up on a little farm in Kentucky, but she planted them way too early. She's lucky those seeds even came up. But they did, said Anna, and it's up to us to save them. And so here you notice that you have a little bit of a better sense of who Anna is, like deep down as a person. Um, she's outright. This shows a shift in how she is. So anyway, um, it was a weekend in May and hot. You'd have thought that those beans were hers. They needed water, especially in the heat. She said the girl hadn't come in 4 days, sick probably, or gone out of town. Anna had twisted her ankle and couldn't manage the stairs. She pointed to a pitcher. Fill that opens up and soak 'em good. Quick now. School janitors take too much bossing all week to listen to an extra helping on weekends. I stared at her one long moment, then took my time about filling the pitcher. I walked down the stairs and into the lot and found the girl's plants. You don't plant beans till the weather's hot. Then I saw what had kept her seeds from freezing. The refrigerator in front of them had bounced the sunlight back up on the soil, heating it up like an oven. I bent down and gave the dirt a feel. It was hard packed and light colored. I studied the plants, leaves shaped like spades and a deck of cards. Definitely beans. I scraped up a ring of dirt around the first plant to hold the water in any rain that fell. I picked up the pitcher and poured the water slowly. Then I heard something move and spun around. The girl was there, stone still, 10 feet away, holding her own water jar. She hadn't seen me behind the refrigerator. She looked afraid for her life. Maybe she thought I'd jump up and grab her. I gave her a smile and showed her that I was just giving her plant some water. This made her eyes grow even bigger. I stood up slowly and backed away. I smiled again. She watched me leave. We never spoke one word. This, more than any other phrase, we never spoke one word, encapsulates the book more than any other. So, with what I said earlier in mind, with common ground, what is the significance of this phrase? What is the significance of this phrase to this book? Okay. I don't know. I'm going to let you stew on that one. I'm not going to answer that one. I walked back there that evening, and checked on the beans. They picked themselves up and were looking fine. I saw that she had made a circle of dirt around the other three plants. Out of nowhere, the words from the Bible came into my head, and a little child shall lead them. I don't know why at first, then I did. There's plenty about my life I can't change. Can't bring the dead black back to life on this earth. Can't make the world loving and kind. Can't change myself into a millionaire. But a patch of ground in this trashy lot, I can change that. And change it big. Better to put my time into that and moaning than moaning about the other all day. This little grammar school girl showed me that. The lot had buildings on three sides. The setting's established now. You know what you're looking at. I walked around and picked myself out a spot that wouldn't be shaded too much. I dragged the garbage off to the side and tossed out the biggest piece of broken glass. I looked over my plot, squatted down, and fingered the soil a while. That morning, I brought a shovel home from work. Now, our last chapter of the day, Gonzalo. I know this is a little bit long. Um, you maybe can figure out that Gonzalo, based on his picture, is of um, Hispanic descent in some sort of way. Um, but anyway, I'm gonna start with him. His chapter probably has the most depth out of all the ones that we've read so far, or not probably, it does. The older you are, the younger you get when you move to the United States. They don't teach you that equation in school. Big brain Mr. Smoltz, my 8th grade math teacher, hasn't even heard of it. It's not in Gateway to Algebra. It's Garcia's equation. I'm the Garcia. 2 years after my father and I moved here from Guatemala, I could speak English. I learned it on the playground and watching lots of TV. Don't believe what people say. Cartoons make you smart. Now, you guys may not realize this. But they actually have a lot of things online, and like people have written before, and even like researchers have even suggested this. And they said that the best way, like if you're in a place where you don't know the language and you want to learn the language, one of the best ways to learn the language is by watching cartoons. Um, Cartoons have simplified language. The characters' faces, their facial expressions, and what they're doing is very exaggerated. And so cartoons are a great vessel for learning a new language. Um, and actually, a lot of people that go to a new country, um, they learn the language that way through cartoons. My father, he worked all day in a kitchen with Mexicans and Salvadorans. His English was worse than a kindergartner's. He would only buy food at the bodega down the block. Outside of there he lowered his eyes and tried to get on by mumbles and smiles. He didn't want strangers to hear his mistakes. So he used to make phone calls and talk to the landlady and to buy things in stores where you had to use English. He got younger. I got older. And so this one, a lot of the depth comes from like racial issues that occur every single day. Um, a lot of people um, have the misconception of assuming that people from other countries um, are less intelligent or unwilling, or that they're unwilling to learn and assimilate to a new culture in some sort of way. And so an example of this is I used to work in a place um, where we'd have lots of people. I worked in a store, and we had lots of people of different races and that sort of thing. And a lot of times, people of other races that were from other countries that didn't speak English, um, they'd try to figure out ways to communicate with us, with me and another person that was working with me. They try to figure out ways to communicate with us. And so whenever if you don't if you don't know if you don't know the language, you kind of resort to like very, I guess, um, like hand gestures or very broken language, or what little bit of the language that you know. And so I used to have someone that worked with me, that was not very sensitive to this. It was very strange. And they would, instead of like working with them and trying to figure it out, they would just say whatever they said in English louder and louder until basically the people either gave up or, it was really, really mean, and it was really, really, um, I don't know. But my point is that like, like if you can't speak the language, if you can't speak the language of a new culture, a lot of times you can't speak the language of culture, you'll appear less intelligent and more like a child. And so that's what's going on here, where it says he got younger, I got older. I knew the language even though I was younger, and he didn't. And so anyway, continuing, bottom of 18. My younger brothers and mother and Tio Juan, her uncle, came north and joined us. Tio Juan was the oldest man in his pueblo, but here he became a little baby. Same kind of thing. He'd been a farmer, but here he couldn't work. He couldn't sit out in the plaza and talk. There aren't any plazas here. If you sat out in public, some gang driving by might use you for target practice. He couldn't understand TV, so he wandered around the apartment all day, in and out of rooms, talking to himself like a kid in diapers. One morning he wandered outside and down the street. My mother practically fainted. He doesn't speak English, just an Indian language. I finally found him standing in front of a beauty parlor, standing through the glass at a woman with a dryer over her head. He must have wondered what weird planet he'd moved to. I led him home holding his hand the way you would with a 3-year-old. Since then, I'm supposed to babysit him after school. One afternoon, I was watching TV, getting smart on the Brady Bunch. Suddenly, I looked up. He was gone. I checked the halls on all 5 floors of the apartment house. I ran to the street. He wasn't in the bodega or the pawn shop. I called his name, imagining my mother's face when she found out he'd fallen through a manhole or been run over. I turned the corner, looking for the white straw hat he always wore. 2 blocks down, I spotted it. I flew down the sidewalk and found him standing in front of the vacant lot, making gestures to a man with a shovel. I took his hand, but he pulled me through the trash and into the lot. I recognized the man with the shovel. He was the janitor at my old school. This is Wendell. Different shades of green leaves were coming up in rows. Tiawan was smiling and trying to tell him something. The man couldn't understand him and finally went back to digging. I turned Tiawan around and led him home. That night he told my mother all about it. She was the one who could understand him. When she got home from work the next day, she asked me to take him back there. I did. He studied the sun, then the soil. He felt it, then smelled it, then actually tasted it. He chose a spot. He chose a spot not too far from the sidewalk, where my mother changed buses. Where my mother changed buses, she'd gone into a store and bought him a trowel in 4 packets of seeds. I cleared the trash. He turned the soil. I wished we were farther from the street, and I was praying that none of my friends or girlfriends or enemies saw me. Tijuan didn't even notice people. He was totally wrapped in the work. He showed me exactly how far apart the rows should be and how deep. He couldn't read the words on the seed packets, but he knew from the pictures and what seeds were inside. He poured them into his hand and smiled. He seemed to recognize them like old friends. Watching him carefully sprinkling them into the troughs he'd made, I realized I didn't know anything about growing food and that he knew everything. I stared at his busy fingers, then his eyes. They were focused, not far away or confused. He'd changed from a baby back into a man. And so what you're going to see, that's chapters 1 through 4. What you're going to see with that last thing, he changed from a baby back into a man. Um, even the last chapter with Wendell Wendell is miserable at his job as a janitor. He says he gets yelled at all day. He's treated awfully. But he comes home and he starts working in the garden, and that misery changes. Tio here, he has nothing. He can't speak the language. He's walking around talking to himself, um, but he sees like something. He sees a language, like he knows the language of the garden. He knows the language of the grass and the soil and planting. He knows that. It's common ground. And this book, more than anything, is about the power of shared experience. That last chapter, that sentence, we didn't speak one word when Kim and Wendell came to look at each other, and Kim was originally scared, but she saw what he was doing, and she understood it just from without the word, not the words he was speaking, but in just what he was doing. And so, like I said, more than anything, this was about shared experience and the power of it. And so look for those moments in the rest of this book as you read through them, and as you're answering those questions, because this book is great. It's great for star prep. More than anything, it's great for teaching you how to be a good person. Um, I love this book. Thank you for staying with me. I'll be back in a few days. Um, but until then, you'll answer your questions whenever we come back. We will go over them. Thank you. Thank you. You guys have a great rest of the day.